Good evening. I am Cantor Amanda Kleinman. I'm the senior cantor of Westchester Reformed Temple, and I'd like to welcome all of you to WRT on behalf of myself and WRT's clergy and professional teams. Our senior rabbi, Jonathan Blake, very much wishes he could be here, but is unfortunately traveling out of town for a congregational wedding and sends his greetings. I'd also like to offer a special welcome to some of our clergy colleagues from other Westchester congregations who join us in the audience this evening. In the Jewish tradition, over the past 4.5 weeks, we have been counting the Omer, the weeks between Passover and Shavuot, when we will commemorate receiving the Torah. We are heartbroken that even as we count the days toward this joyous time on the Jewish calendar, we are also counting upwards of 230 days that our brothers and sisters have been held hostage in Gaza. 2 months ago, a delegation of 20 congregants from WRT spent 4 days in Israel on a solidarity mission. On the second day of our trip, on our way back to Tel Aviv, after spending time at Kibbutz Be'eri and at the site of the Nova Music Festival massacre, we stopped at Kibbutz Gezer, where we met in the sanctuary of the community's synagogue with a member of the kibbutz named Siegel. Over the course of 90 minutes, Lee shared the story of his brother Keith and sister-in-law Aviva, who were kidnapped from their home in Kfar Aza on October 7th. Aviva had been released in November and was advocating tirelessly for the release of her husband. Several of the participants on our trip join us in the congregation this evening, and I know that I speak for all in our community when I say that we feel a special connection to the Siegel family. We were deeply moved then when Westchester County District Attorney Mimi Rocha reached out to share that she had been contacted by Aviva's family, who were in New York and had asked to address our community. You'll soon be introduced to Aviva, together with her daughter Shir and Shir's fiance Yuval. But I just want to thank the extended Siegel family on behalf of our entire community for taking the time to share your story with us today. We want to offer very special thanks as well to Mimi for organizing and moderating our program today. WRT is proud of Mimi's ongoing advocacy for the Jewish community since October 7th, in particular for the return of the hostages and in bringing awareness about sexual violence against women perpetrated on and since October 7th. We are grateful that some of our elected officials have joined us this evening to offer support and show solidarity. We'd love to invite up in the following order: Scarsdale Mayor Justin Arist, New York State Assemblywoman Amy Paulin, and New York State Senator Shelley Mayer. After they offer greetings, we invite Westchester County District Attorney Mimi Rocha to introduce Aviva Siegel, Shir Siegel, and Yuval Barron.
Good evening. I extend my heartfelt gratitude to Cantor Kleinman and WRT for their unwavering support of this community and for making this evening possible. Thank you to our dedicated district attorney and friend, Mimi Rocha, for leading this important event. And of course, my deepest thanks to Aviva for being here tonight and sharing your story. It has been 230 days since the horrific attacks on Israel and 226 days since I first stood here with many of you for a vigil to honor those lost and to pray for the safe return of those taken hostage. Tonight, I address you with profoundly mixed emotions. I am happy and relieved that Aviva is no longer a hostage and is with us today. Yet my heart breaks that the same cannot be said for her husband Keith and many others who still, after 230 days, remain captive. I am outraged by the distortion of Israel's right to defend itself, turning it into something sinister and less than what it is, just. I also feel a deep sadness at the moments when it seems Jewish people around the world, and even here in America, have been abandoned. We have witnessed countless instances of protesters on college campuses assaulting individuals simply for being Jewish, calling for the destruction of Israel and the Jewish people. Some institutions have even yielded to this hostility. This is not free speech. This is a form of terrorism and is un-American. We deserve better, and we must demand better. Despite this, looking out at all of you, I find hope. Because here in Scarsdale, we stand with Israel. And despite a vocal minority, I know that America does too. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting each other, for supporting me. When Mimi reached out and said that she had been contacted by a family who wanted to speak to us, we both knew, as members of this synagogue, that the right place was here. We were in a room just a few minutes ago, and Aviva said 210 people registered. Wow, only in 2 days. That's because we too are part of Israel. I have family there. My daughter made Aliyah there. I have family that I don't know that are there who left Europe when my family came here. Israel is a part of us. And when Israel hurts, so do we. And not only have we been hurt by the injustice and the terrorism and the attacks, we now face anti-Semitism every single day. Luckily, for the most part, if you stay in Scarsdale, you don't feel it. But let me tell you, I feel it. Going to Albany, I feel it, I see it. Last night, I was at an event where there were protesters that I had to walk through. I've almost gotten used to walking through protesters. It's unbelievable that we are here in our lifetime and are experiencing something that we could never imagine growing up in this country. My heart aches. And that's why there are 210 people registered, because we know we need to hear the story. We need to bring the story back. So we just want to thank you for telling the story, because it helps us stay together, be together, and to communicate out into the world that this story needs to be told over and over and over and over again. And you're giving us that tool. So thank you, and again, thank you for letting me be part of this community.
I am not Shelley Mayer. We will do this a little out of order. She's stuck in traffic, but I just want to tell you a little bit about how this came about, as it's been mentioned, but I think it's worth, Shelley's here, but I've started, so we'll have you go a little bit later. I was contacted by Yuval over WhatsApp on, I believe it was Sunday, and that was after another friend, contact, had put us in touch, someone I had met here back in, I think, January or February, Yarden Gonen, who is the sister of Romi Gonen, who is one of the young women still hostage. And Yarden, when she was here, I and some other women arranged a talk. This was all mothers of young women who were being held hostage. And that happened in Brooklyn. And
Yarden was just such an incredible light, talking about her sister, who I feel like I know, as I'm sure many of you do from reading about her and hearing about her. And so she first texted me and said, Aviva's family is coming, can you figure something out, maybe find a way to have them talk to some people? And I, of course, said, okay, because that's what any one of us would do in this situation. And I got on 2 different text chains and texts with Shali and Amy and friends, some of whom are in the audience, and then very quickly with Cantor Kleinman and Rabbi Blake. And this all happened Sunday night. Just the way people jumped into action, it really, people ask me, what gives you hope? And that gives me hope. The fact that we can all be there and be so effective, frankly, for people that we haven't met in person, for people that we feel like we know, though. And so I think it says a lot about our support for you and about this community. And I mean the WRT community and the broader Westchester community and the Jewish community. I'm going to talk a little bit about Aviva before she gets up, of course, in her words, to tell her story. Aviva Siegel was born as Adrian in a small town that I cannot pronounce in South Africa. When she was 9, she made Aliyah with her family to Kibbutz Tzora, which is home, as probably many of you know, to many South African Olim. In her early 20s, a friend from that kibbutz, who would later become her sister-in-law, introduced Aviva to Keith Samuel Siegel. Keith had just made Aliyah from the United States. Aviva loves children, and she worked as a kindergarten teacher, and she loves animals, and had been working with farm animals at Kibbutz Kfar Aza when she and Keith lived there, where they lived, I think, for almost 40 years until October 7th. Keith turned 65 in captivity on May 8th this month. He was born in Northern California and grew up in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. He is a dual American-Israeli citizen. Keith's family describes him as an incredibly generous, gentle person, respectful of those around him. He is a loving husband to Aviva and a father to 4 wonderful children, Shay, Gal, Ilan, and Shir, and 5 lovely grandchildren who they love. Their daughter, Shir, is here today, and her fiance, Yuval, who is the one who first reached out to me. Keith, as I said, made Aliyah 44 years ago, and he and Aviva lived at Kibbutz Kfar Aza for more than 40 years. He worked in the agriculture, the kibbutz plastics factory, and most recently in the pharmaceutical world. And I'm told he's an expert in nutrition and how to take care of your mind and your body. And we all hope that that is helping him right now. Aviva and Keith were kidnapped together on October 7th and held together. And as I said, Aviva will tell her remarkable story of survival. But I want to just point out one thing that I think is really worth highlighting. As you probably know, Aviva, and the fact that they're here, she was released after 51 days, which we're so happy for, but she has been working so tirelessly ever since she came back to speak out and fight for the release of Keith and all of the hostages. She was one of the very first to use her voice to talk out loud, to speak, to give words to the sexual violence and harassment that these young women have been suffering and are continuing to suffer. And I know that must be so hard for her to do. She gave testimony about it in the Israeli Knesset. She speaks to the press about it all the time, and she's so articulate about it and passionate about it. And, you know, she has called herself a survivor. She is a survivor. She is also a fierce advocate and she's making a huge impact, and we are so honored to have you here. And I will now let you speak, and then we will have some time for questions afterwards. I believe we have cards. Okay, we'll pass out some cards. If you do have questions, you want to write them down. I also have some questions, but would love to get audience questions as well.
Thank you. Thank you for coming and being with us, holding our hands and not letting us feel alone. That's Keith. This is Shir, my daughter. And Yuval is sitting here, like she said, and I'm lucky to have them. So I want to thank you again, and I want to tell you that all the years I used to think about how come Jews don't live in Israel, because all the Jews should live in Israel. And now I understand how important it is that not all the Jews live in Israel, that you live here and help from here and do what you do. Because I think without you living here and having friends that aren't Jews and talking for Israel and helping from far, I don't think Israel would have made it with this brutal, terrible. I don't think there's a word to say what this kind of war is. But I do know that on the 7th, something very, very different happened. And it's beyond any human being to understand or to believe. And that's why I'm here, to come and tell you the story, because we've still got Keith and 127 hostages in Gaza going through hell, suffering like I did. And we need them to come home. So I'm from Kibbutz Kfar Aza. I've been living there for more than 40 years with Keith. We got married very young. It's a community about 900 people. 63 people were murdered on the 7th. 19 people, including me, were taken to Gaza. 63 people of them I know. They're my neighbors, they're my friends. Some of them, because I was a kindergarten teacher, I taught them when they were babies, and I know them, I know their families. I know everything about them. It took me 3 weeks to understand that something happened in Israel when I started asking questions. Because coming from Gaza, I was in a shock there for 51 days. And coming back out of the shock, stayed in a shock, knowing that Keith is still there. And I'm not in a shock anymore, that's for sure. But I do know that we are going to do everything we can to get them out. Do you want to move that I can see you? This place is too big. Sorry. I'm a talker that talks to people. I need to see your eyes. I need to see that you're with me and that I'm with you. So I'll start from the beginning. It all started, like everybody knows, on the 7th of October. At 6:30 in the morning, we ran to our little shelter in the house with the first alarm. And we looked at each other after 2 of them opened the door and left. And while we left the little shelter in our house, we saw through the window all the missiles going to Tel Aviv, maybe to Beersheba, and there were lots of them. And then there was another alarm, and we got into the shelter, closed the door, and said to each other, something different is happening this time. It never ever started like that. I was shaking already from the beginning. We sat, and they took us after 4 hours, so that was a long time to be scared, shaking. Luckily that I had Keith with me, holding my hand and trying to relax me and telling me, don't worry, we're safe. And then on a WhatsApp group from the kibbutz, somebody wrote that she can hear noise that she's never ever heard before. And we started hearing that noise that we didn't even realize because we were so hysterical already. It was the shooting on the kibbutz. And then, a couple of minutes later, somebody wrote that there's terrorists on the kibbutz. We both opened our eyes and looked at each other and were in a shock. Terrorists? It's hard to believe. Maybe 10 minutes later, somebody wrote that Ophir was killed. And I remember looking at Keith and saying to myself, what's happening? How come people are killed? What? How? What, he walked outside and they killed him? So I thought, we have to lock the window and lock the door. So Keith locked the door and the window. And I told him, I don't want to hear anything else. I don't want to hear bad things. So he protected me. But he did tell me that Shai, my son, that's living on the kibbutz, wrote that he's holding his fingers, crossing his fingers, and that he can hear the Arabic from outside. And we disconnected. I'll tell you more about Shai. We were sitting, and then we heard them coming closer and closer on the shooting. And then we heard them shouting. And then we heard them walking inside the house. We heard the steps just next to the door. We were lucky because we sat in a place that if they shoot from the window into the window inside, we won't be shot. And we sat not in front of the door. As I said, Ophir was killed, so I thought that maybe he was killed from a bullet outside. They opened the door with a click, like any door opens, even though on the door it's written locked. Tried to shove themselves inside, about 15 mean, brutal terrorists, to figure out who they've caught now. And what saved our lives is that Keith put his head on his knees and his hands on his head, while I stood up next to him and started screaming. I screamed, and they were shooting and screaming back, where is Valad? Valad is a child, because we've got a crib for my grandchildren. And I screamed back, no Valad. He didn't believe me. They looked in the cupboards. They looked underneath the beds. They looked in all the cupboards of the house while they took us out. They ruined, with their guns or with their hands, everything they canned on the way, and took us outside the house in the back window, not through the door. While we could hardly step on the chair that they put there, pulling me, I nearly fell. We started walking, and Keith said, we need to run away. And I looked at Keith and I said, how? They're shooting on us. How can we run away from them? Keith said, they're going to take us to Gaza. And I looked at him and I said, okay, we'll go to Gaza. What? So that just means that I was in a complete out. I wasn't really standing on earth, and I wasn't really understanding what's happening around me. But Keith was. Just the way he said, they're going to take us to Gaza and that we have to run away. So I said, Keith, if you try and run away, you're going to be dead. They're going to kill you. So I took his hand and pulled him and walked. But he walked slowly. They pushed us. They pulled my hair. And Keith fell, and they broke his ribs. They shot us, and one of the bullets hit Keith's hand. They took the keys of Keith's car, and that's how we arrived to Gaza, while he was bleeding on his pants, trying to tell me all the time, we need to figure a way to run away. And I'm telling Keith, no way, they'll kill you. We arrived in Gaza and were taken straight down underneath the ground. 10 minutes later, somebody came from Gaza. His head was cut. His shirt was full of blood. His pants were full of blood, and his legs were full of blood. He was barefoot. He could hardly walk because they shot the window, and he stood on the glass. 10 minutes later, a family from Kibbutz Kfar Aza came, a mother and 3 kids. And we were all told to sit in a small place underneath the ground, and the mother couldn't. That's Chen Goldstein. She was walking in circles in that little place and saying, they killed my daughter. They killed my daughter. They killed my husband. She said my husband took a stick to try and look after us. They shot him in front of the kids, in front of her. My daughter fainted. They told me to wake her up. I tried to, and she didn't. And they shot her. And I was trying to calm her down and telling her, don't worry, she's going to be okay. Maybe they just shot her and she's going to be okay. I'm sure she's going to be okay. Don't decide that she's dead. She's going to be okay. She looked at me and she said, they killed her. They shot her face in front of the kids and her mom. And that's how we started. The boy that was with us, they had killed the dog, and all the blood from the dog filled his body. And my son Shai has a dog that I don't think she's a dog. She's sort of a person for us. And I was sure that they shot Shai's dog, and Shai must have screamed at them, and they must have killed Shai. So I, for 51 days, was 100% sure that my son was killed. It was very, very difficult to even think about it. And luckily I had Keith to relax me and say, everything's going to be okay. And when he wasn't okay, I told him that everything's going to be okay. And that's what we did. And Keith is still there without me, going through hell, and I'm not there for him. And my heart is broken up into pieces. One of the days, they took Keith into the shower, and after an hour or some, he came out looking like an Arab. And the terrorists with us were laughing. He looked at me and he said that they humiliated him. They shaved him, looking like an Arab, shaved underneath his arms, and told him to shave his intimate place. he said that he felt like nothing in earth. It was a terrorist that must be maybe 22. It could be our grandson. That made him look like a joke, and they laughed. And that's what they did with us. They did whatever they want to, whenever they want to. They starved us and just sat and ate in front of us. They didn't give us water for hours, for days, while they were drinking in front of us. One of the days, Keith got up to the bathroom and nearly fell. And they brought each of us 2 dates. And that was after 20 hours of not eating at all. He was weak. We were all weak. So I said, we should just fall every once in a while. Maybe we'll get some food. One of the days they starved us, and the girl that was with us, she couldn't stand that anymore. So she asked him, the terrorist, what about food? He looked at her without even blinking. It takes a long time to make food. 4 hours later, after 24 hours, what did we get? A half a pita. And that was for supper, after 24 hours of not eating. And I remember thinking to myself, maybe tomorrow morning we'll get a little bit more than that. But I just thought so. The next morning we got a half a pita that was dry. So for 48 hours, all we ate was 1 pita. And I didn't even finish my half. I was worried about Keith. And I didn't feel hungry. And I offered him part of the pita. And he said, no, you have to eat. You're losing weight. I lost 10 kilos in 51 days. And he wasn't prepared to take any of my food anymore. Because at the beginning he did. So I hid it in a piece of tissue. And every time we got a little bit of bread, I hid a piece. One of the days they brought us a little bit pita with a little bit of cheese. I put the cheese inside, I wrapped it up into the paper and put it with other pieces. After a while, the girl that was with us, she looked at the packet and she said, I'm throwing it away, Aviva. You can't eat it. And I said, don't. Just leave it. Maybe we'll need it. Can you believe that? 2024? I can't. Like, I think it was Yuval saying that after the Holocaust, Jews all over the world said, never again. But it's happened again. And Keith is still there. The girls are still there. I just don't understand what's happening. For 5 months, I've been telling terrible stories of things that are happening there. I've said so much. Meaningful things that should move human beings. And they're still there. And it doesn't seem like anything's happening. It doesn't seem like we're working on it, it's going to work. They'll come home soon. The opposite. I'm sick to my stomach, like all the Jews in the world. And because I was there, and I saw that, we all of us, need to scream and not allow things like that happen to anybody. One of the days, one of the girls went to the bathroom, and while she came back, I saw that something happened. I got up and I gave her a hug. And the terrorist came in and started screaming at us. And I looked at him and I said, "Don't worry, everything's okay. I love her." She was very quiet. We were all quiet. We knew that something happened. After a couple of hours, she came up to me and whispered. He touched me. We were sick. We were crying. We were upset. And I couldn't do a thing. The worst part was to see everybody around me suffer and me not able to help. I'm a teacher for little children. When they fall, I pick them up. When they cry, I hug them. When they're thirsty, I give them water and I feed them. And I'm that kind of person. To be there with my hands tied, my mouth shut, and not able to do anything to help them, broke my heart every time. And now I'm here, and Keith is there, knowing what he's going through. And I feel like the world is tying my hands and closing my mouth by not listening. It's terrible. We're human. We've got hearts. We feel. I don't understand how the world doesn't feel. I'll never understand that. One of the girls was called out the room and 2 minutes later brought back and was told to get dressed. They used to dress us like Arabs. While she was getting dressed, she turned around and she said, "I'm scared. They're going to take me. They're going to take me away from you all and I'll be alone." He hit her, pushed her, threw her on the floor, put the gun in front of her eyes, and said, one more word, I'm going to kill you." I wanted to scream. I wanted to vanish. I didn't want to exist anymore. It was too much for me to see that. They took her to the next room with a blanket, handcuffed her, and 4 terrorists hit her. Hit her with a stick, with their guns. One of the girls that was with us told me, "Aviva, put your fingers in your ears. You don't want to hear that." It didn't help. With my fingers in my ears, I heard them hitting her. When she came back, she was red. Her hair was standing. She was red all over. And from the handcuffs, her hands were red for at least 5 days. I looked at her and I said, "How come you were so quiet? Why didn't you scream? I would have screamed." And she said, "I didn't want to give them the pleasure." I was so proud of her. And the girls are still there. Keith, my Keith, is still there. Thrown on a mattress. Maybe just like a rug, if you can say. Like nothing. We weren't allowed to talk. Sometimes we were allowed to whisper, but it was only sometimes. Most of the times, we couldn't even see much because they darkened the room. And if we could see each other, we were sad. We used to just look at each other in the eyes and try and figure out what is happening here. What are we doing there? How come we're still there? The terrorists used to say that the whole world is shooting Israel. There's no Israel anymore. Kfar Aza is theirs, does not exist anymore. And I believed them. I don't know how, but I believed them. They brainwashed me. They took us to places. Keith and I moved. We were moved 13 times. One of the times they took us down into a tunnel, 40 meters underneath ground. It was Keith and I and another girl. And they just left us there. The first couple of hours they stayed and understood that there's no oxygen there, so they went up and left us there. They didn't even bring us food. They didn't bring us water. We were sure that we're going to die. After 3 days, that Keith couldn't breathe and I couldn't breathe. And I looked at him and I could see that he was trying to figure out how to breathe. And I was trying to figure out how to breathe. He said, I feel I don't have any oxygen left. And I looked at him and I said, Keith, don't worry. You're going to be okay. We did that all the time. He relaxed me and I relaxed him, knowing that there's no oxygen. So when the terrorists came down, the girl that was with us said, I don't want to see them dead. You need to take us up. We can't breathe here. He just looked at us. The next morning he came down and I looked at him and I said, one more day, I am going to die. And you'll have to carry me. And he looked at me and he said, very, very bad. And I didn't know what he meant, because we could hear the bombing from up. Or maybe there's no house for us to move in. And then he said, very, very bad, no oxygen. And I said to him, we've been telling you that. So he said, if you need me, call me. And the girl that was with us and Keith stood there and screamed his name, and he did not come. We were sure that we're going to die. They were worried about me. I was weak. I could hardly talk, just lying on a mattress on the floor. After many hours, when he came down, we asked him, why don't you come? You told us, call me and I'll come. He said, sorry, I was sleeping. Thank you. We were waiting, trying to figure out if we're going to live or if we're going to die, or if they're going to take us to a house or not take us to a house. So the next time he came, he said, sorry, no house. I just started crying. And I said to myself, okay, I could say goodbye to this world. I can't tell you in words what it means lying in a dark place underneath the ground with no oxygen and trying to breathe. Until today, when there's good air, and this area's got good air, you can feel it. When you go out, you'll feel it. I just do that and I say, air. When I drink water, it's the most delicious thing in earth. And those are the two things until today. I'm here nearly 6 months. That's in my mind all the time. How lucky I am that I have air, and how lucky I am that I can drink water. And Keith is still there. It took me 5 months for my blood tests to go normal. They weren't balanced. When I came back after losing 10 kilos, I could not walk without leaning on somebody. It took me quite a while to walk and to feel strong because we weren't allowed to move. We weren't allowed to stand. All we did was sat on a mattress on the floor, or most of the time we had to just lie down from 5 o'clock in the afternoon until 10 o'clock the next day and not even sit. And I've got back problem. So while it was nighttime and we had to lie down, I could not sleep. They used to take the torch and put the torch in front of my eyes to make fun of me because they knew that I wasn't sleeping. And I used to pretend that I'm sleeping. Just because I didn't want any problems with them. We did everything they told us. They made us feel like we are nothing. No human rights at all. The only right that we had, if we can lie on our stomach, or if we can lie on our back while we're lying down. And that's the only right that we had. They told me that I've got 5 more minutes left. And I've just started. So they always tell me the last 5 minutes I have to tell you about the day that I left. It was a very difficult day. Keith and I were lucky that we were together. Lots of couples were separated. So we were lucky to be together. And that last day, we were terrorists that were just the meanest, brutal monsters in earth. They put black materials on our eyes that we can't see where we're going. And they took Keith downstairs, brought him up with not telling him anything before that. And only that day they brought him long pants. They left him with shorts and a short sleeve shirt, and it was winter time already. So they brought him long pants, and I knew that something else different is happening. So they came in and put the material on Keith's eyes and took him. The terrorist that was with me and the girl that we were with told us, don't worry, we're going to pray to Allah now together, and when we finished, we'll go to Keith. And Keith came back after a couple of minutes. He was wet, sweating, shaking, and he said that he thought that they're taking him and that he'll never see me again. I hugged him and I said, Keith, don't worry, I'm here. Because he couldn't see me. He had the material on his eyes. After that, they took the material and put it on our eyes and took us down the stairs. I couldn't see. I didn't know where to put my feet. I tried to get hold of his shirt just to see where to go. He pushed me. I walked holding the wall of the stairs, going down, and then I couldn't find the wall, and I stood, trying to figure out what to do. It was silent. He pushed me into the car. The girl that was with us was sitting next to Keith, so I couldn't see Keith. I was shaking. But very quickly, she gave me Keith's hand, and I knew that Keith was with me. And I felt lucky again. They drove us in a car to a house that was just part of a house left, and all the area was bombed. And I remember saying to myself, good, It's going to be quiet here. Maybe we'll be able to sleep a little bit. We walked up the steps, and they took Keith to a different room and wouldn't let Keith be with me. And I was begging for Keith to come back or me to go to Keith, and he said, no, no, no. After we arrived to that house, 10 minutes later, a terrorist came to me and said, you, tomorrow, Israel, come. So I said, me? He said, yes. I said, I'm not going anywhere without Keith. Me and Keith. He said, no, only you. So I said, no, I'm not going without Keith. I begged him until I understood that I better get up and listen before they kill me again, because they try to kill us all the time. He wouldn't let me say goodbye to Keith. I pushed him, and I said, I'm going to Keith. Keith was lying on a mattress on the floor in the next room. And I went to him, and I gave him a hug. And I said that he told me that I'm going to Israel, and that he must be strong for me, and I'll be strong for him. I didn't believe any word that he said, the terrorist, because they lied to me. Keith didn't say a word. He was in a shock. I was in a shock. And that's how we separated, never knowing if I'll ever see Keith again. They took me in a car, just me and the terrorists, and I remember thinking, maybe it's going to be my last day. Maybe they're just going to kill me. And if I'm going to ever see Keith again. We arrived to this house, and they brought a Thai guy that was with us, with me and the terrorist. He was shaking. He was scared. So I hugged him. And that's what we did the whole night. And the next day, they took us. Can I have another 5 minutes? Okay, sorry. They took us, and they put us in a car. I was sitting with a little girl that's 8 years old and a sister that's 15. And her sister told me that she'll never forget her sister screaming when they sewed her finger. This finger of hers was disconnected completely. She said that they took her sister to a vet to sew her finger up. And she'll never forget the sister screaming. And the sister was sitting next to me, and I just hugged her. And then the terrorist came and said, you're not going to Israel, you're all going to Europe. And this little girl, 8 years old, started crying. I took her, I hugged her, and I said, don't worry, I'm with you. We'll go to Europe together. And then we'll come back and we'll look for your mother. Her mother luckily wasn't on kibbutz, Nachal Oz, but her father was. And they asked them, where are your parents? So they said that the father is in a different car and the mother wasn't on the kibbutz. So when they arrived to Israel, they heard that the father was killed. While we were sitting there and waiting, they brought an old lady and a Thai guy, and they put them at the back of the car. And I was scared to turn around because the terrorists were there in the car to see them. So I didn't. And I said to myself, okay, the Thai guy must have brought his mom from Thailand to visit. Poor thing, she came to visit while she was kidnapped. Bad luck. And then one of the terrorists was shouting, does anybody know English? Tell her to pick her head up. So I turned around and I saw this old lady sitting in a chair with her head down, And I told her, pick your head up. Pick your head up. But she didn't. So I said to myself, Tov, she doesn't understand English, but I don't know Thai. And then I said, but why doesn't the son tell her to pick her head up? And I started thinking, and then I turned around. And I looked at the terrorist in the eyes, and I said, you need to lie her down. Her legs were purple. She was freezing. She had sores all over her. And they brought her to sit next to me. I held her head, and I gave her a little bit of water, and she drank. And I said, good, she's alive. And when I touched her, it felt like touching ice. So I told them to bring her a blanket, and they brought her a blanket, luckily. I put the blanket around her, and I started massaging her whole body, and massaging her whole body, and telling her again and again, you have to continue living for your children. They're waiting for you. They've been waiting for you for 51 days. They're going to take us out. Please, just stay alive. And she's the strongest lady that I've ever met in my life. I kept doing that for 4 hours, massaging her and shouting and telling her, please keep alive. And saying to myself, haven't I gone through enough? Why me? At one stage, I told the girls that were with me, please just see if her eyes are open. I don't want her to die, and I don't want to look at her when she's dead. And she said, don't worry, her eyes are still open. She kept her eyes open. When they took us to the Red Cross, I told the woman of the Red Cross, please help her. There was somebody that he called himself a doctor, that I told the Hamas people that she needs a doctor now, and if not, she's going to die. And he said, no doctor. After 3 hours, a doctor came, and he tried to give her a pill, and I told him, if you give her the pill, you're going to kill her. He looked at me, and he gave her the pill. She coughed it out, luckily, because he nearly killed her. The Red Cross, when they came, they took her, and then she came, the lady from the Red Cross, and said, we're looking after her, we're going to warm her up. She arrived in Israel. She was 28 degrees. They said another half an hour, she would have been dead. And I helped her by massaging her body and shouting in her ears that she needs to keep herself alive. And she was in hospital until a week ago. And they sent me a picture of her holding a little baby in the family. So Israel has gone through a lot. Kfar Aza, there's 7 widows with babies left. I know them all. There were two kids that hid themselves in the cupboards while their mom was in front of them dead. 2 babies that are 10 months old that were left for more than 20 hours in a crib. People were shot, and there was nobody that came to help them. And they spoke to their families on the telephone, slowly, slowly, until they died. So their families have to handle that too, of their loved ones that died very, very slowly. Israel, Kfar Aza, has gone through a disaster. I'm lucky to have Shir, my daughter, and Yuval, and my other daughters, and my son that's still alive, that helped me go through this time. I'm not going to ask for another 5 minutes. So, what did we say? That people are going to ask questions? And Yuval and Shir, are you going to come and sit here? Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I think we are, I don't know if this is on, but you can hear me, right? First of all, thank you, Aviva, for sharing that with us. I mean, it's obviously incredibly hard for you to tell this over and over, and yet I know you feel compelled.
It's not hard for me.
Okay,
People
okay.
hear?
Yes.
It's not hard for me. The only thing that's hard for me is that Keith isn't here.
Yeah.
The only thing.
And we understand that, but it is meaningful to hear from you, and particularly, you know, to hear how you did survive while you were there, and how hopefully Keith is still managing to survive in many of the ways that you talked about. And in fact, there was recently, I know you haven't watched it, but there was, you received proof of life, as they call it, and that was quite recent. So we are very, very hopeful about Keith and him coming home. I wanted to ask Yuval actually a question. I mean, you have been traveling with your fiance and your soon-to-be mother-in-law, and I know, you know, working with them so closely to try and make sure the stories are told. Your whole lives obviously have been uprooted, not even talking about what happened on that horrific day, but since then, I imagine before this you had jobs and schools and plans, and, you know, tell us what it's been like and what you're doing to help keep this family so supported.
Sure, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and having us. It is very moving to see a strong community. Yeah, like Aviva described, our family, I'm quite new to the family, but our family and many other families went through hell on October 7th, and this hell keeps on going as long as our loved ones are still in captivity. It's a very weird and frustrating position to be in, because you're sort of, you know, in between the worlds, between life and death, between earth and the sky. Your loved one is inaccessible to you, you know nothing about him, but you need to keep on fighting and keep waiting and have patience for his and theirs safe return back home. And the other thing that is frustrating, well, there are a few, but a main one is that seems like the world is moving on, moving forward. It's a very difficult topic, and seems like many people prefer to push it aside. And I think our main battle as hostage families is to keep it front and center. For a long while now, we never imagined it would be, it's almost 8 months since October 7th, and we never expected it to take so long. And as we all know, the world is crazy and the media cycle is fast. and we find it more and more difficult to have our voice heard. So that's what we've been working at. We're doing it in 3 main platforms. One is the media, both in Israel and internationally, and in the States. As Aviva said, or maybe Mimi mentioned it, Keith is an American citizen, so we try to come here quite often and spread the word here. As one is media, the other one is public events like this one and others. And the third is personal meetings. We just came from the United Nations. We met with the Qatarian ambassador and with Pramila Padan, she has like 4 letters for a title. I forget them, but she deals with sexual assault. So of course she heard Aviva's testimonies previously, and now we had a second meeting with her. We're basically meeting whoever has some influence and is willing to hear us. And it's a full-time job. Aviva came back, and we thought she'll have a few days or a longer time, a few weeks of recovery. But, after the hospital said she's fine, she stood up and said, okay, how are we bringing Keith back home? And we are working tirelessly around this matter, traveling all over the world and trying to think creatively. But at the end, as a citizen, the things that we can do are quite limited. But we know that we need to keep on doing that, and that we don't have any other option to do whatever we can, even if it's small, even if it's limited, because we can't let go. We don't have the privilege to let go until Keith and the rest of the hostages are back home. So I'll tell you a little bit who we were before. 3 weeks before October 7th, I took the bravery pill and offered my loved one to marry me. And we were supposed to get married already last month, but of course we're waiting for Keith. Shir is a social work. We both go to university. We live in Haifa in northern Israel. Shir studies social work, and I study medicine. And like the rest of the hostage family, our life stopped on October 7th, and we stopped working. We go to school a little bit to try and move it forward, but it's not easy at all. Oh yeah, you tell.
This picture was taken 3 weeks before we were kidnapped. We were next to a river, sleeping in a tent, when they told us that they're getting married. And it was one of Keith's happiest days and my happiest days. And I was sure that I would never be in the wedding. And I'm lucky that I am, that I'm alive, and that I'm going to be at the wedding. And we need Keith to come back for them to get married.
That's actually the first thing. So when Aviva was released, they got to the first army checkpoint and had a phone call to call us. And when Shir picked up, that's the first thing she told her. I'll be at your wedding. Jewish mothers, right? And we get some financial support from the country, but it's not enough. And we sorry, my thoughts. We get some support. It's not enough to keep going. And when Keith comes back, we got Aviva after 51 days, and she's still going through some rehabilitation. Keith is already 4 times more in captivity. We hope he'll be here tomorrow, but seems like it takes time. And we want to give them both the perfect life and sort of a small compensation for everything that we're going through. We just renovated a house for them. So we started a fundraising campaign for the family. And it's very embarrassing to ask for help, but it's something we're practicing. And people always ask how to help, and some of this help could be financial. So we'll pass it through the community, and if you feel right, we would really appreciate any amount donated, and if you can spread the word. And we really believe that if we put an intent for like a cause for Keith's fast arrival, then it will happen. So that's one other thing I wanted to share. And thank you.
And you told me beforehand how hard it is, obviously, to ask strangers for money. But we all understand what you're going through and how much you need to be supported in so many different ways. And so there's absolutely no shame in that. And we all want to help and feel like your family. So it's like helping family.
Thank you.
I don't want to, do we have any questions that you want me to pass along? Okay. Somebody wanted to know, you talked about your son and his dog, and how you unfathomably thought for 51 days that he probably was not alive, but thankfully he was. Can you tell us about his story and what happened to him that day?
Shai, as I said, was on the kibbutz when it happened, and the Hamas terrorists built a slick. I don't know what a slick means.
Like a hiding place, like a storage.
Underneath his house. And when he told us that he can hear the Arabic, that's what they were doing. After some hours, he started hearing, instead of Arabic, he heard Hebrew outside the window, and he shouted that he's there and that he needs help. And the army, he opened the window for them, and they climbed into his house, and they shot the terrorists that came to take whatever they put underneath his house, and that's how he was saved. They didn't go into his house. They just put all the guns and everything underneath his house. And we're lucky. I think that everybody in that area that is still alive should feel how lucky they am to still be alive.
If I can add a few words, it's, we're all living the Jewish narrative and, of course, the Holocaust story. And when you hear about Holocaust survivors, you realize how random it was. Someone got lucky, went right instead of left, and it saved his life, and he had a family, while his friend went the other direction and was killed. And in a way, it resembles that, because some people, terrorists entered their houses and burned them alive, and others, the next house was saved. So there's a lot of luck or bad luck there. I remember when we got the message that Keith and Aviva were kidnapped, the whole family was hysterical, and the first thing I told Shir is, we're very lucky it's not the other option. And I think that hope keeps us running, that we know he's alive. Well, we know he was alive 3 weeks ago when the video was released, and we know he'll come back, and we keep waiting.
Actually, one of the other questions sort of ties into that theme, which is, do you have an idea or a sense, did you have any idea of why or how you were selected as one of the hostages to be released? Did you know then, or do you know now?
If I knew that I would go out there,
Yeah, did you have any, I mean, obviously they were releasing in that time period women, supposedly women and children, but not all women were released. Do you have a sense of how it came about that you were allowed to be released?
no, not at all. But I just want to say that when I was in Gaza, we did not hear any news about anything in Israel, just what Israel is doing there, bombing everything and killing people. So I didn't know if I would ever go out. I really thought that I was forgotten. And I hope that Keith is keeping his hope. I don't know. We don't know if Keith's alone or if he's got somebody with him. I'm just hoping all the time that he's not alone, that he's got somebody to be with. It's very difficult.
The last question I wanted to ask, because I know you have been speaking about this so much, and it is so important in terms of reminding people why, I mean, every day matters for every single hostage, but there was a video released yesterday, I believe, of 4 young women actually being abducted, and their families, 5, chose to release it to try and get the world to scream about this and care about this. And you were one of the first, really, when you came out to start to give voice to what is happening to the young women there. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and what that reception has been to you talking about it in Israel?
Can you repeat the last part?
How the Israeli government and people in Israel have taken your information, how have they received it?
מה הייתה התגובה כשהתחלת לדבר על הנושא של הפגיעות המיניות?
Everybody thanked me for being their words and speaking for them. And that's exactly what I was doing. I was doing it for them because I was with some of them and they like my daughters. And I know what they're going through. And they are not allowed to stay there. I'm scared that we're going to get news that some of them are pregnant. And they were talking about their periods all the time. And like everybody knows, it's going to be 8 months soon. That's a long time if they're pregnant. And I'm very worried about them. And the video that came out yesterday, I did not see, but I heard from the girls exactly what happened there. It's a disaster. It's, like I said, it's beyond. And what happened in the video is beyond. And the world can't allow themselves to keep quiet. By keeping quiet means that any boy can do whatever they want to. They can just touch girls. And we need to scream for the world to understand that if they're just going to leave them there and keep quiet, then any boy in any country can think that it's okay to just touch girls when they feel like it, or just torture people. Or people asked me, weren't they nice to you and Keith because you were old? And I said, no. These 20-year-old people, terrorists, treated us like we did. They could have been my grandchildren. And they treated us just like everybody else. And it shouldn't be like that. The world needs to wake up and understand that there are things that have crossed the line. And I don't understand how the world doesn't understand that already, because I've been talking and talking and talking and said so much and said too much about what's happening there for them to realize that the people need to get out there. It's not an ordinary jail. It's with these Hamas terrorists, monsters, that just do whatever they want to all the time. I was threatened so many times. I was scared that I'm going to die so many times. And I used to say to myself, rather, let them just kill me and I'll be dead, that I won't have to feel or go through what I'm going through. And I can't even think about Keith there and the hostages there that are still going through what I went through. And I just don't understand. It's going to be 6 months. On the 26th of this month, I'm going to be out for a half a year while they're still there. And the world is keeping quiet. I met Biden, and he's wonderful. He's got a huge heart, and I love the words that he said, but words aren't enough. He needs to do something. He needs to feel that he's the strongest nation in the world, and things like that are not allowed anywhere. I want good for the Gaza people that are good people. I want good for all the people in the world. People need to realize and understand that people live once and we have a heart. My heart is broken. I'm finished. I've had enough. It's much too much for somebody to be there knowing what they're going through and still have Keith there and all the hostages there. And I'm screaming and I do not know what more to do.
And I know it doesn't feel like it, but your words are making a difference. I mean, everyone who's heard this tonight, I had heard you speak at, watched you on different videos, and it does allow us, not that we need to hear these horrific details from you, but it helps us vocalize it. It helps give us the strength to go on, because I think everyone in this room feels certainly not what you're feeling, but we all feel angry at the world and frustrated. And you are giving us hope. So as I can't imagine how absolutely exhausting this must be in so many ways. But we are grateful that you are out there telling your story. You have a very powerful voice and a very powerful way of telling the story and the details and giving words, as you say, to these people who are still there. And we all hope so much that they come home. And when they do, we will have a big celebration. But thank you for honoring us with your presence.
Amen.
Before we leave, I'd like to take just one more moment to thank Aviva and Shir and Yuval for spending this time with us today, because it's our hope that you and your families will continue to see WRT and our wider Westchester Jewish community as an ongoing source of support. I would love for us to conclude with a prayer for the hostages. Mishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov v'imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah. May the Holy One who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, bless, protect, and guard our missing brothers and sisters who are in distress and captivity. May the Holy Compassionate One bring them out of darkness and the shadow of death. May God break their bonds, deliver them from their distress, and bring them swiftly back to their family's embrace. May there be fulfilled in them the verse, "Those redeemed by God will return. They will enter Zion with singing, and everlasting joy will crown their heads. Gladness and joy will overtake them, and sorrow and sighing will flee away." And together we say, Amen. Thank you.